Anthony, 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 A-N-T-H-O-N-Y, Anthony, A-N-T-H-O-N-Y, Anthony, 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 Anthony.
Hello, it's just gone 12 midday and it's Monday the 7th of November 2022, and welcome to Unity News and welcome to the Anthony Webber Perspectives, my look at the events and news of the day and the week. And let's hope you all had an excellent weekend and are looking forward to this coming week ahead. And of course, on the 5th of November we had Guy Fawkes night, so hopefully you all had a good time then. Of course that's when people wanted to burn down the Houses of Parliament, but I always think it's very interesting some of these places which have really traditional bonfire nights. One of them is Lewes in West Sussex, where they have about 5 different competing bonfire societies and have a lot of different effigies burnt. And I think there was another one in Edenbridge in Kent where the national media were featuring effigies of Liz Truss, which were going to be burnt. So all in the sense of fun and tradition. Let's hope the woke brigade don't want to get their hands on that. It's Remembrance Fortnight, as we know, because on November the 11th is Remembrance Sunday, Remembrance Day, and this Sunday for a lot of parts of the countries will be where Remembrance Service will be held, but Remembrance Day is of course the November the 11th, and that's when we give thanks for the sacrifices of all those who stood up for freedom, not just in the 2 major world wars, but in all the many conflicts Britain has been involved with. And you know, let's give a few of the less well-known ones: Aden, Palestine, the Cyprus terrorist emergency, the uprising in Kenya, many others. And you know, a lot of those had people who didn't come home or had serious injuries. But what we must remember with Remembrance Day is that we've got our own fight for freedom on at the moment, and it's a very real one, because all of the things in the past that we stood up for to defend our freedoms, most of them have been taken away already. So I think Remembrance Fortnight is a good opportunity for us to decide that we're not going to tolerate any more of our freedoms taken away, and in fact we're going to roll back everything so we get back all the freedoms we lost. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. I welcome everyone to the Anthony Webber Perspectives programme, and if anyone wants to get hold of me, they can directly via Unity News or on Twitter, which is at Tony_Webber, or Facebook Anthony David Webber. And if anyone wants to have a look at National Alliance for Freedom, that's at National Ali, because that one had to be started again because of the Twitter problems with some accounts. But anyway, what are the main items today? Well, there's been a lot of discussion about Rishi Sunak and how he's managing his period as Prime Minister, so we'll be dealing with that. But very crucially, we've got a budget on November the 17th, and we'll be having a look at some of the things which could be coming along. Then I'll be doing a bit of a roundup of some other news, and perhaps my favourite spot of the day, which is where I highlight the special days which relate to today. Updates on where we are with Unity News, on free speech, and the continuing threats to the NHS, what's happened post the debate on the public inquiry into COVID-19 vaccines, where we are with the campaign to have a referendum on the UK becoming neutral in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and something which many people may have forgotten about, but there's a by-election coming up on the 1st of December, so a little bit of information on that. Update on the immigration and immigration situation, on strikes, where we are with freedom operations, and a number of other things, World Cup, energy costs, and Great Reset, and so on. So many items to discuss today. So let's just have a look on the situation with Rishi Sunak. Well, of course, you know, he's been Prime Minister for another week longer now, and I think it'd be interesting to know what people think. I think he's helped the Conservative Party in the sense that they're finally settling down to some stability, but how far does that go? How much is he going to help in regaining some of the trust the public did used to have in the Conservative Party, but haven't anymore? And last week I dealt with the issue of, have the Conservatives kept to any manifesto pledges at all, which they made in 2019? And certainly they've brought in a number of policies which are not in their manifesto. I mean, how they dealt with COVID-19, how they dealt with the Ukraine crisis, the overzealous net zero part of things. You know, there's so many things which were not in their manifesto at all. But what is what sort of direction is Rishi Sunak going to take? And that's a very crucial matter. But we have to bear in mind that he was fully behind, although he maintained he wasn't, fully behind the COVID-19 restrictions, even to the extent that he had all these schemes, the furlough scheme and the pub scheme where people were encouraged to have a meal out, and lots of other schemes, and he allowed all these things to go through, which meant that there was upwards of about 500 billion which this government spent on their COVID-19 so-called pandemic. And you know, now we're, you know, what's the saying, you reap what you sow, because now the public are being told they've got to pay back this money, and that's a pretty disastrous thing. So for anyone to maintain that Rishi Sunak managed the economy well, I think they need to think again, because all one has to do is look at those countries in the world which didn't have lockdowns, didn't go for mass vaccinations, didn't do all these awful things which we did to restrict freedom in the UK, and those countries are doing so much better economically. Now, there are not many of them, but good for them. One of them we know is Sweden, but there are sort of many others. I've dealt with them in the past. That's where we are now. Of course, Rishi Sunak has made the decision to go to the COP27 conference in Egypt, and apparently he's caved into pressure on that. It may well be that he was right in the first place to decide not to go, because he should have been spending his limited time on prioritising getting the economy right. But what has happened? He has made a speech where he has opened the door to so-called wealthy countries in the West paying reparations to some of the not so wealthy countries to deal not only with the effects of so-called climate change, but also in matters relating to that. Now, I don't know if that was just words or whether it means actions as well, but the reality is you cannot, as a Prime Minister, expect the public to have cuts in services, increases in taxes, and give more money away in overseas aid in whatever little title or format you present it as. And this is one of the things many of us said when the government was blowing money on COVID-19. Other budgets are going to suffer, and that includes overseas aid. But if they're going to say that overseas aid is actually going to increase, then that really is unacceptable, because even for those who are fully in favour of overseas aid, and there are a lot of countries which do genuinely need help, we should, one should budget your country's economy in such a way that you can afford to do this. But you can't take money from a poor country, and we're basically becoming a poor country heading in the third world sort of status, which is not good at all. Anyway, that's the situation with Rishi Sunak, and one of the things is that we're now in a situation where we've had the previous government on Liz Truss was promising some help with energy, and that's been honoured, so to speak, by Rishi Sunak, but he's said it's only for 6 months. So I think we're in for a pretty disastrous time in the new year, probably even actually before that. And Rishi Sunak says it's time to be honest with the British public. Well, the only thing he's been honest with is something he should have been honest with a long time ago, is he should have said the country couldn't afford all this expenditure on COVID-19. And if you're honest, you can't just be selectively honest. You can't conveniently ignore the cost to our economy of the government's Ukraine policies since February this year. Now, anyone looking at the prices of virtually anything compared with February and compared with now the beginning of November will see that there have been horrendous increases, and most of that has been to do with our self-defeating Ukraine and Russian policies. So if he wants to be honest, he will say this is because of our Ukraine policies, but he's got basically no mandate for that at all. And what we're looking ahead with the energy situation, for instance, they've got what they call is a Goldilocks strategy. Now, they always come up with these weird and wonderful names, but that basically means that energy bills costs are going to be shared in three directions. One, the consumers, two, the taxpayers, and three, a windfall tax on energy companies. Well, I actually predict that we won't actually be able to get that much money out of the windfall tax, because these energy companies have had plenty of warning they'll be doing any evasive asset measures they can to get out of it. And the taxpayers are the consumers, so it's basically poor muggins, the ordinary person who's going to suffer. So anyway, not only have we got all these economic problems, we've got problems with members of the cabinet, and we've got Gavin Williamson, the man who seems to have been in and out of a number of jobs, but many will remember him when he was Education Secretary and as a major whip in the Conservative Party. And now there's been this controversy regarding his very over-the-top rudeness to a colleague. Rishi Sunak said that he didn't know the content of what was said, but he did know about these allegations when he appointed him to his position. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because Rishi Sunak has said he is going to have the highest standards of integrity and transparency in government. So let's see how he deals with this person who is over the top rude to his colleague. And at the end of the day, you know, the other side does have a chance to put their point of view forward. So I'm all in favour of Gavin Williamson being given that opportunity, and then a decision needs to be made. But I don't know how viewers look at the situation, but I still think that the Prime Minister has not chosen the best people for the best cabinet positions, and a lot of that has been rewarding political favours. But let's see. The jury is out on that. Now, yes, a few comments about other countries being virtually bankrupted and so on. Yes, thanks for watching, everyone. But let's look at what's actually coming up, because on November the 17th is Budget Day. Now, it's interesting how this has been dealt with, because it was supposed to be earlier. We know that has been postponed. And my thought on that, well, yes, I prefer it to be postponed, because I'd prefer them not to make any mistakes. However, what we've had is dribs and drabs being released every day about what could be in the budget. So first of all, we are warned generally that things were not going to be good, and there might be increases in tax and cuts in services and so on. But it's all been happening almost, as I said, on a daily basis. I mean, we had, for instance, the Arts Council in England, who are given government funding. They've suddenly withdrawn massive funding from the English National Opera and one or two London institutions, saying that more has to go to the provinces. Well, that's all well and good, but if you're going to ruin these national institutions in London, it can't actually be a good thing. So I'm a great believer in, you know, it's no point in just having a policy and sort of saying, let's equalise arts throughout the country. You've got to do it in such a way that you don't actually ruin what is a very good thing already. And the reality is, you know, a lot of key arts and musical things will always be in London. So, you know, that's a simple fact. But let's look at some of the things which are going to happen. We are told in this budget that virtually everything is going to be subject to cuts, with the exception of defence, would you believe, and with the exception of possibly overseas aid. Now, why would there be a need for increased defence expenditure when any such need is only because of the government's policies in Ukraine and Russia? In other words, piling so-called aid and certainly plenty of military equipment into the Ukraine, a lot of which never even gets to the front line. It ends up in the hands of criminals to be sold on elsewhere. So no accountability there, but we, the British public, are told we have to have a cut in our services, cut in budgets for education, social services, everything. We're told there won't be a cut in the budget for the NHS, but we know what that actually means, because I think the NHS have actually asked for another 7 billion. I can't see them getting that. What we'll be told is, oh, the NHS have been given a little bit more money, but in real terms it will be less money, so that will have an effect on the services. We have to remember that services in the NHS are already rationed. You try and get a scan or X-ray or whatever. It's not always easy because they've got this rationing in place. So we need to go back to the stage where, if you were unwell, the purpose of the National Health Service, and it was provided because we were paying through our taxes and national insurance for a sort of insurance policy, so that if anything happened, virtually anything would be paid for in the NHS to look after our health needs. Now, obviously, there are limits to that. You can't sort of have a patient who's got needs where it's £1 million a year, but somewhere in between there's an ability for the NHS to provide good quality service to the majority of the public. But let's have a look at council services. Now, our local councils provide a lot of things for us, and it's not just the bin emptyings and various other things, but it's anything from, in some cases, education services, certainly social services, libraries, swimming pools, parks, you name it. Now, a lot of swimming pools are going to be in danger of actually closing or having restricted times. Same will apply to libraries and education services, which need more money because our children and grandchildren suffered so much during the COVID period. There needs to be more emphasis put back into education, but it seems that across the board there are going to be quite major cuts and major rises in tax. Now, how can that be afforded? Because if people at the moment can't afford energy bills, they can't afford food bills, how are they going to afford them when their council tax goes up and their tax rates go up? And I should have mentioned that the government's going to put in place a means where councils can increase their council tax more than the 1 or 2% that they're allowed to do per annum at the moment. So if you look at council tax as well as business rates are about the most unfair taxes which ever existed, and it means that poor people end up paying exactly the same rates as well-off people. Yet there's going to be a lot of clobbering on its way. Anyway, we've got sort of very bad news coming up with the budget. So this is where we need to be prepared at a national level and a local level to absolutely insist that we don't have these cuts, and that instead the government changes its policies on Ukraine and Russia, and also if it's made any firm sort of commitments regarding COP27, then you know, they should not go ahead with that. You know, there may well be some very good reasons for helping on environmental issues, but at the same, if the government thinks they got money to blow on proxy wars, then I'm sorry, that money can be cut and spent on environmental issues if they want, but we can't have both. We're not in a situation where the British public should be made to be paupers just to support what are basically the interests of globalist corporations who've got far too much influence in our government. And you know, quite often it's said, oh, what about the corruption in Middle Eastern countries, third world countries and so on. Well, you know, we forget about the growing corruption which is going on in the UK. You know, that MPs can almost be bought because you know, they'll ask questions and do lobbying. If they're paid a fee to be a consultant by a lobbying company or another commercial company. So it's not a good situation at all. We need to have a more honest government, I think, is the answer on that. And yes, this comment which appeared, get rid of diversity managers, yes, there's certainly no need for those at all. And yes, national insurance is just a tax. It's an interesting comment because when national insurance was first set up, it was genuinely an insurance that people paid. Admittedly, it was a bit like a tax, but officially it was insurance. And it meant if you were out of work, you automatically had support from the government while you were seeking a new job. Now they've actually changed that so that you don't necessarily get the support from the government. There are all sorts of constraints. So it can't be an insurance policy, can it? I mean, it's like if you have a car insurance policy, if you go in an accident, it's paid for. But if these insurance companies started saying, well, we're adding some extra provisos, we're not going to do this, that and the other, that would be unethical. And basically that's what the government's doing, being unethical, because they've taken our money and they haven't given us the benefits of what that money was actually intended for. So I've got no objection to national insurance and tax if it can be justified where that money is going, but you know, we all pay national insurance and tax to get benefits in return, not to have money wasted. So anyway, just like to get on to some other news items. We have got still a huge proportion of rough sleepers across the country, ranging from 25% more in London than last year, and it's pretty much the same in other parts of the country. And that's something, you know, this government is allowed to happen, yet they're putting up migrants in 5-star hotels. I mean, it beggars belief. So, you know, our own citizens who've hit hard times for all sorts of reasons, they can just die in the streets as far as the government's concerned. Well, very, very appalling, I must admit. Now let's look at news in the other parts of the world. There's been this Brazilian election where Lula da Silva has apparently won by a narrow margin. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there, because there have been allegations of vote manipulation, and in particular in parts of the country where there's control by criminal gangs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Yeah, so the other thing is what's going to happen with Suella Braverman, and the situation with that is who knows, but my view is we're still actually waiting for action from Suella Braverman, and if somebody's conduct is that bad and they have to be removed from their position, surely there's some strength in depth in the Conservative Party that they've got somebody of quality to take over. You know, there is this other point of view that the people who are in favour of the woke agenda do want to get rid of her. So we mustn't make life easy for those people, because if it was one of them, they wouldn't be making these sort of allegations. One interesting piece of news is that regarding America, of course, on the 8th they've got their elections, and as usual they're in this awful situation where the electors there have to choose between Democrats and Republicans, and it's all complicated. On the one side, it's sort of maintained that you know, the Democrats are responsible for all the horrors of the woke agenda and everything else, but it's got rather complicated in that a number of Republicans don't want to vote for Republican candidates who are too anti-abortion. So it's very, very complicated, and it's a shame in a way they don't really use referenda in the United States, because they could easily deal with some of these issues. Instead of, you know, if you vote for Democrats you get X, Y and Z, and if you vote for Republicans you get A, B and C, and maybe you'd like a bit of both of the parties, you know, and probably the same sort of situation applies here, because certainly they are in a huge mess in the United States, and you know, a lot of that can be blamed on President Biden. But anyway, there's one thing which has come out, and I noticed in The Guardian, that there are more than 138,000 residential and commercial properties in England and Wales owned by offshore companies, with holdings in London alone worth over 55 billion. So, you know, this country has just been bought up by a lot of other people, mainly foreign residents of other countries. Sometimes they're foreign people who've taken up residence in the UK. Now, an interesting thing which came up again over the weekend, this issue of treatment of Prince Andrew, this regurgitated story that Prince Andrew was very upset being told that we wouldn't be having any role to play in the royal family. Now, I think there's lots of different points of view on this, but I don't think everyone in the royal family is white and white. You know, some of them are pretty close to being perfect, but some of them are not. So I think personally, I feel that no account whatsoever has been made in respect to Prince Andrew of the fact that he served with distinction in the Falklands campaign, and that far more equals any service any other member of the royal family is put in respect of you know, serving for their country overseas. Because even Prince Harry he did have 2 tours of Afghanistan, but they weren't really that long. So I think these things should be taken into account, and it's a shame we never got to have that trial regarding Prince Andrew, because we'll never know what the truth was. But at the end of the day, what we do know with all of that is all the people who were associates of Epstein, all these politicians and business people, they're not the ones in jail. They're carrying on their lives as normal. So how come all these people who've done all these awful things, they're scot-free? There's something terribly wrong with that. One thing I will say, which is a positive about Rishi Sunak, is in terms of standards of MPs, he did actually criticise Matt Hancock for getting involved in I'm a Celebrity, this jungle thing, and I personally think it's totally unacceptable for an MP to do that when they should be conserving their constituents. Now, one of the things coming up is this expected NHS strike, and apparently it will hit any patients the most, and it will mean that there'll be a postponement of non-urgent operations, and it will mean that the waiting list will extend even further. So I think the government were quite happy to value, so to speak, the NHS staff with meaningless clapping, but they weren't prepared to value them. If they wouldn't have their jab, out the door they went. But now they're not going to value them in terms of paying them what they professional people in that category should deserve. So this government does need to get that together, because we the people should be able to expect a properly running, efficient National Health Service. Now let's have a look at what day it is today, and of course it's the 311th day of 2022, and there's only 54 days until the end of the year. So Christmas is looming, as we know. You only have to go out shopping and you see everything's out for Christmas and so on. And it's also, we're in the time of Scorpio. We know that the lead correspondent of UNN, David Clews, a week last Sunday had his 40th birthday. He's a Scorpio, a lot of the positive qualities of a Scorpio, and Scorpio is October the 23rd to November the 21st, and it's the 8th sign of the zodiac. So happy birthday to anyone who is a Scorpio and who's having their birthday today. Noticing all these comments coming up, I'm not sure just because there's no trial you're necessarily guilty or innocent, because we just don't know all the pressures which went on behind the scene. I thought I personally would like to have an inquiry into it all, because there was £12 million was paid to not have this court action go ahead, and although in theory it was the Queen's money, was any of it public money? I'd like to actually know. Anyway, today is Job Action Day, and it's actually for those not who want to go out and find a job, but it's to recognise those who dream of having a job they love. And it's National Canine Lymphomia Awareness Day, and lymphomia is one of the common causes of canine disease, so look after your canines, that's the thing. It's actually All Saints Day today, and it's to honour All Saints in the Christian tradition, and you know, this is, you know, the end of the period between All Souls Day and All Saints Day, and of course we had Halloween Day and so on. Now, it's also Colour the World Orange Day. It's not just about getting cured, but about learning how to live with what you're being cured from. So anyone who's in that position, it's your day today. Anyone who likes a bittersweet chocolate with almonds, it's actually your day today, so you can tuck in. National Cancer Awareness Day. Now, you know, sadly there's all too many people we know who've got cancer, and let's spare thought for them. And also bear in mind that there are a lot of very good natural remedies to not just prevent cancer, but actually to have good hopes of curing it as well. It's National Hug a Bear Day, and it's not just for your own teddy bear, it's to wrap your family's friends, your family and your friends in a bear hug, or people who are close to you. So watch out if somebody comes up to you and throws their arms around you. Now, for special days of people, it's National Keith Day, so well done to the Keiths. National Lorry Day, and it's actually National Recreation Day, so we all need a reminder of having more recreation. And famous birthdays today, it's Marie Curie's birthday and the well-known evangelist Billy Graham. Now, it's a quick look at tomorrow, Tuesday the 8th. It's STEM STEAM Day, which is basically the idea that children are better off with strong science, technology, engineering, arts and maths skills. Well, I'm sure we'd all like our children and grandchildren to have as much of those as possible. So yes, I noticed the comment about David Notes, and I know exactly what happened with him, because one of my sons did actually do some work for him. I myself knew David very well, so it was a tragedy how David was actually treated. So good comment, that one there. Now it's Albert and Punster's Day. It's Unleash Your Best Puns, and the saying, a pun a day keeps the doctors away. It's a day to loosen up, laugh, have puns and pranks. So if you want to do that, go ahead. And it's also Cook Something Bold and Pungent Day. That's for weird and wonderful food. So if you want to hit the kitchen, now is the time to do it. Of course, US Election Day, as I mentioned earlier, tomorrow. International Day of Radiology, which is very important, you know, radiology and healthcare. Now, for those who called Adam, it's National Adam Day tomorrow, National Ashley Day, National Christopher Day. Well, as one of my sons is called Christopher, I mustn't forget that. National Irene Day, National Kyle Day, and National Leon Day tomorrow. For those who like their coffee, National Cappuccino Day, and for those who are in the dunce category, National Dunce Day. That's Harvey Wallbanger Day for you know, those who like the less alcoholic beverage. National Parents as Teachers Day, because you know a lot of parents do home teaching. It's Talk Money Day, World Pianist Day, and World Town Planning Day. That's very important to get your town and village planning right. Just a reminder that November is the month of, is called Aviation History Month, Child Safety Protection Month, International Drum Month for those who like the drums, National Adoption Awareness Month, National Caregivers Appreciation, National Diabetes, National Epilepsy, National Model Railroad. I'm sure there are people out there who like the model railroads. National Novel Writing, Peanut Butter Lovers Month. Well, that's me. I've been tucking into peanut butter. Real Jewellery Month. Well, of course, you know, a lot of these online TV companies sell jewellery which is sort of fake. National Sleep Comfort Month. That's always very important. World Vegan Month. I think World Vegan Day would be enough for me. And that's basically it there. So on to the next item, which is where we are with Unity News. And we're exceptionally grateful at Unity News for all the support we get from everyone. And I noticed that comment, by the way, about World Phoenix Day. There probably is one. It wouldn't surprise me. But apparently, if you do want to have a day to celebrate something which is important to you, you can apply online for that. I think the website is National Days or something, but it's on Google. But anyway, going back to Unity News, if those of you get the emails will see that we've got a strong team dealing with every day of the week, and I'm currently on Mondays, but we all are happy to help each other out. So you know, that's where we are on that. And Unity News will continue to you know, allow different points of view to be put forward. We always say we don't necessarily agree with all of those views, but we're giving freedom of speech, obviously within bounds, but we're giving freedom of speech and on issues which are very important, which don't get an airing in the old mainstream media. So anyone who hasn't supported us or would like to give more support, please do so, and it's all very much appreciated. Some people will have noticed we've had the occasional technical difficulties. All these things do require resources and money, so the more we get in, the better we can improve things. So now on to what Unity News very much promotes, which is freedom of the media. And we've got a pretty awful situation with the media at the moment, where they're basically manipulating the public on a number of issues. And it isn't actually just the BBC. I mean, the BBC on occasion be absolutely dreadful, but the other mainstream media can be just as bad. But on the subject of the BBC, one of the worst things was actually a news programme yesterday which referred to a panorama programme tonight on Mariupol in eastern Ukraine, which the BBC sort of tried to make out they were in the city, which has been in Russian hands for yonks. It's got a huge Russian-speaking population, but it sort of made out that everyone there was being oppressed and everything else. And of course the usual dose of alleged mistreatment, war crimes and whatever. Now, we know in war situations things are not perfect, but for some reason in the Ukraine, the only people who do anything wrong in the conduct of the war is the Russians. The Ukrainian side, they're like halos, they haven't done anything wrong at all. And that's one of the things we need to get right, because we need to have fair and impartial and accurate reporting. And a number of people would have noticed the BBC has been slipping in almost like ads, trying to make sure they check their facts and everything else before they put things out. Well, it's just patently untrue. And how we're going to deal with that, again, requires resources, because if you're going to tackle a media company on basically telling lies, then you do need to have the resources to do that. But I personally believe the BBC needs a big overhaul, and they need it needs for the people to take back control, almost like on a cooperative level, because all their so-called criteria in place to have a factual media just doesn't apply at all, because we know they don't have facts, they have manipulation. And you know, we have had manipulation by the BBC and the other mainstream media on the whole COVID-19 period. We've had it on climate change. You know, they exaggerate some things and downplay others, and try and make out that those of us who support sensible environmental measures, you know, we're not doing enough, whereas in fact it's not the case. It's the sensible environmental measures which we're not actually doing. But the latest situation with media manipulation has been the situation regarding Ukraine, and it's after being quiet about the situation for some time, the media now sort of saying, oh well, yes, the economy is in trouble, cost of living, interest rate rises, inflation, energy price rises, companies going bust. That's because of Putin, so to speak, war on Ukraine. Now, the reality is it's not because of Putin's war on Ukraine, it's because of the government's Ukraine and Russian policies. So it's a complete mistruth to say that, and it's dishonourable in fact, but it's also misleading the British public, and now we're told we have to suffer all these things because we need to stand up for democracy and freedom in Ukraine. And again, that's where they're being dishonest, because there isn't democracy and freedom in Ukraine. They shut down their opposition parties and they shut down their opposing media. So there's no freedom to defend there. And the reality is that the Ukraine would have had a peace deal way back in April, but Boris Johnson turned up with a few billion and persuaded them to fight on. Obviously with the United States as well. And these leaders of the EU, the UK and the USA have actually put the vested interests of the globalists in Ukraine above the interests of their own people. But what is worse is that they absolutely go out of their way to deny any debate whatsoever on this whole issue. And I sort of must mention here, very grateful to the people who've signed the petition for there to be a referendum on the UK being neutral in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. But if there's any additional reason why that should be signed, or even a reason on its own, then it's because the government is making this the most no-platformed petition ever. It's absolutely impossible to get this petition in the mainstream media, and it's absolutely appalling. And we must fight to make sure we have free debate on this issue. And let's just remember that this is an issue where the government's prepared to virtually bankrupt the UK just so they can fight their Ukraine proxy war. Yet they were quite happy to abandon 26 million people in Afghanistan, throw away their freedoms, human rights, rights for women, and that was costing 1 billion a year. We've already spent 8 to 10 billion on Ukraine in 8 or 9 months of this year, with more to come. But the worst is with Afghanistan, which is a more honourable campaign to be involved in, we didn't have any effect on our economy. But this Ukraine policy has been a disaster. But it seems is all part of a great plan, a great reset to actually ruin our society, put more people out of business and impoverish the people of this country and some other countries as well. Thanks for putting that petition up, but key thing is, if you know anyone, please ask them to promote it. Sometimes just one person signing and then promoting it can mean about 100 people sign it. You just never ever know. So that's an important factor there. The other thing I was going to mention was what happened with the post the debate into the public inquiry into COVID-19 vaccine safety. Well, you remember we did have this debate on Monday the 24th of October, and there are a lot of things which we're still working on that, but this actually ensured the issue of COVID-19 vaccine safety was debated for the first time ever in Parliament. So anyone who says, you know, signing petitions is a waste of time, just bear in mind, for a minute of your time to fill in a petition, that gives the chance of us getting a key issue debated in Parliament. And the same applies to the Ukraine petition and any other ones. This is our way of getting things in Parliament, and it's on top of everything else we do, which we must do as well, but these things are important. But anyway, what's actually happening is, since that debate, there's been more circulation of videos of the debate. I saw one only today which said that 300,000 people had seen it, so that just shows the effectiveness. Every day more information is coming out about COVID-19 vaccine damage, and we're continuing the campaign to set up a public inquiry for COVID-19 vaccine safety. Now, just remember, the government have U-turned on numerous issues, so there's no reason, if we keep up the pressure, that they can't U-turn on that one. So, we're keeping up the pressure, and everyone who helps on these things, it's very, very important. Now, one way you can keep up pressure is by fighting in local and national elections. Now, we've got local elections coming up, and one thing I should say is that local elections are very, very important, because you look at the situation regarding migrants and so on. If you can get elected onto a local council, you can have an influence on that policy, that council's policy on migrants and refugees, and it is very important, because you can also locally have local referendum. It's not that difficult to apply for them. In fact, it's easier to get a local referendum than it is to get a national referendum. And you can call these for financial and environmental reasons. So if you're concerned about housing in your area being given to migrants and refugees ahead of people in the locality, that's a good reason to take that up. But I was just reading in one county, for instance, in Leicestershire, out of the 134,000 Ukrainian refugees there are in the UK, there's 844 in Leicestershire, and would you believe every council receives 10,500 per person, per Ukrainian refugee, towards resettling costs. They also recently, the host families for these refugees got a 350 payment from the government as a thank you. And now in this particular county, they, from the local rates, they've given another £150 per household to those host families. Now, I can't think of any instance where any local family anywhere have been paid by the government and local council to house homeless people or people on the housing waiting list. So how is it that there's this treatment for a lot of people who basically their claims to be here quite dubious, over and above the interests of people who've been paying taxes and rates? And here's why you should get interested in local politics. There's one local councillor in Leicestershire who's the deputy county councillor. Our support for Ukraine is resolute. Well, I wish their support for their own citizens was resolute. I mean, I'm not against helping people from other countries, but this country is full to the brim. And, you know, we should have had a better immigration policy so that we did have room for people who were deserving, but we don't. So, but anyway, apparently people who put up Ukrainian refugees for 6 months, there's a number here saying they're not going to renew those things. So you can rest assured the government will either pay those host families more, or they'll put them up, and other locals will suffer because that accommodation won't be available. But one thing I've noticed about some of the Ukrainian refugees is just remember that there is national service in Ukraine, and a lot of the men would normally be serving in the Ukrainian forces, but because they're refugees here, of course, they're away from all of that. So there's all these things to take into account. Anyway, there is a by-election coming up on Thursday the 1st of December, the city of Chester, and there are going to be 9 candidates for that. Reform UK, Green Party, Labour, UKIP, Lib Dem, Rejoin EU, Monster Raving Loony Party, Freedom Alliance and the Conservative Party. Now, anyone who wants to help any of the freedom parties, please get in touch with those respective ones. But I can say that I know for a fact that the Freedom Alliance has been the most consistent regarding supporting freedom policies, and they've done a couple of articles recently saying why the petition for the UK to be neutral in the Ukraine should be signed. So there's one or two, the other ones are probably a little bit in between, but I think what is likely to happen is the Labour Party will probably win this seat, and because we've got so-called freedom parties fighting amongst each other, I'll be surprised if the vote isn't actually split. But what we do have a problem with the freedom parties is that basically they're what I call is half freedom motivated. So you know, some of them, they don't agree with vaccine mandates, but a lot of other things they're quite happy with. And although this isn't the view of their rank and file, you do find that they're not prepared to stick their necks out and condemn the UK government's policies on Ukraine and Russia. And I think any new party has got absolutely no hope whatsoever if they can't offer a different agenda to what the Conservatives, Lib Dems, Greens, you know, Socialists, SNP, they all support the globalist Ukraine and Russia policies put forward by this government. So we need to have something different. So anyway, I know at about this time people like to, or some people like to go and watch UK Column, which starts just after 1 o'clock, and yes, if you want to go off there, and thank you for all the very good comments. Yes, it isn't anything to do, Ukraine is nothing to do with that, and with us, and I should have said we had no treaty or no, we don't have any economic or strategic interest in Ukraine, because whatever we did have has got worse because we've taken sides on the issue. So thanks for the comments there. And also it is coming across more that the Russian side, many people are saying, are the anti-woke side. But let's see what happens. And you know, thank you very much everyone for watching, and see you next week. So all the best. So goodbye. Have a good productive week.